Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick. Now that we're getting closer to the end of 2023, it's time to start looking back at some of the best and maybe not so best albums of 2023. Today I'm talking about my 4 most disappointing albums of the year. There's a bunch of links down below. Make sure you check them out. There's links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlists we put together every week, and the Patreon page. Make sure you go check all that out. Of course, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. So I guess I should say that I think 2023 overall has been a great year for music. There's been a ton of albums that I think are really great albums that have been released this year. Some really great bands that I've discovered this year. Some older bands that put out great albums. And then there's some albums out there that I had really high expectations for, or I shouldn't say maybe not like really high expectations, but I had expectations that they were going to be really good albums. And then for one reason or another, I was largely disappointed by some of these albums. One of these albums are so bad, I don't even own a copy of it. Before I get into my list, I guess I should say that I understand that music is very subjective. This is just my opinion. You guys are more than welcome to drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think about these albums and what you think some of the more disappointing albums of the year are. Because, like I said, this is just my opinion. Everyone has their own opinion on music and about particular albums. But I'd love to know what you guys think. So the first album is one that, I don't think it's like a bad album. It's an album that I feel had a whole lot of hype going into it. I listened to some of the stuff off this band's first couple of albums, and I liked what I heard. And then I bought this album mainly off of reviews. It was probably the week or two after the album came out that I finally got around to picking it up. And when I went over it the first time, I thought it was an okay album. I felt like there was a lot of filler tracks on there, some stuff they could have cut to make it a better album overall. But that album is Rush by Måneskin. So they're an Italian rock band, and they've gotten a bunch of hype. And they've been nominated for several awards, and there's a lot of hype around Rush when it was first released. And they have released an extended edition of this album within the last few weeks. I haven't gotten around to listen to the extended edition of it to see if I have any a different opinion on it. But like I said, there was a lot of hype going into this. The first time I listened to it, there were a couple of tracks I thought were okay. But largely, it's just kind of like a vanilla rock album to me. There's nothing really bad on it, but there's nothing else that really kind of stood out to me either. And at times on the album, it feels a little bloated. Like I said, I think they could have cut some of those like filler tracks on there. But like my main issue with it is that a lot of the tracks on here have the same kind of overall sound to them. It sounds like almost one long song just kind of broken up and slightly changed. And, it works for some bands. I just don't think it works on this album. And I've gone back and listened to it a couple of times. And, it just hasn't grown on me at all. And really kind of moving forward, I just don't see this as an album that I'm really going to revisit, and really love. I could be wrong. A couple of years from now, I could finally go back to it and pick up things that maybe I do kind of appreciate. But like I said, the few times that I've listened to this, since this came out back in January, so it was very beginning of the year when this came out, and the probably maybe 4 or 5 times I've listened to it since the beginning of the year, it's just kind of uninteresting to me, I guess is probably the best way to put it. The next album is one that I will say of the 4 albums I'm going to talk about, I think this is it's definitely the least disappointing of the 4. Like I said, I'm still disappointed in it. I really wanted it to be an incredible album, but I think it kind of fell flat, in a couple of different ways. But the album is So Much for Stardust by Fall Out Boy. I was never a huge Fall Out Boy fan, and it was probably within the last several years I've gained more of an appreciation for this band. I really do love a couple of their albums, but, I think that they have some filler albums throughout their career. So when this album, with this album in particular, they went back to their roots. They signed with Fueled by Ramen, which is who they were with when they released their first album. So I guess I was really expecting this to sound like their first couple of albums. And in some ways it does. But, when I sit down and listen to this album, it sounds like it's almost kind of like a collection of filler tracks from a lot of their other albums. And I think that's why it's such a disappointing album to me. And mainly why I think this is the least disappointing of these 4 albums is because there are some really good tracks on here. There's definitely some catchy hooks. There's some great pop punk songs on here. But there's just not enough on there for me to really consider it a really good album. I just kind of think it's like on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd give it maybe like a 4 or 5. It's just kind of okay, and I was really expecting it to be better than that. And maybe this album is just kind of a victim of my expectations because, like I said, a band 20 plus years into their career, it's really rare for them to create an album that really kind of rivals their earlier stuff. And I really kind of hoped this album did. But like as the Fall Out Boy's career went on, it seemed like their albums had like more of a filler kind of feel to a lot of the tracks. Even though I did like some of the stuff off their last couple of albums, I think this one just didn't have enough on there to really kind of pull me back to it. So the very beginning of the year, it was one of the Sunday videos I did with Ian. We talked about our most anticipated albums of the year. The next album was on that list. It was one that we were both, looking forward to. I think he was definitely looking forward to it a little bit more than I was. But I was really interested to see how the album sounded. And then when this was released back in April, I'm glad I didn't pre-order it. Because once I listened to it, it was so bad I couldn't even, I knew I didn't even want to own a copy of it. That album is Rock Flute by Jethro Tull. It's the band's 23rd studio album. When it comes to Jethro Tull, I really only love like their late 60s to end of the 70s, that like decade of music. And really after that, they kind of lost me. And I really haven't been a fan of most of their music since then. There's 1 or 2 albums there I think are okay. But largely they've kind of I've lost interest in them. But this is the follow-up to the Zealot Gene, which they released last year, which I thought was, it wasn't a great album. But I think it was, an okay album for the band. It was the band's first studio album since 1999. So it'd been, a long time since they'd released music. But, they've released, Ian Anderson has released solo music throughout the years. So he was still kind of active. So I would say that Zealot Gene was an album that I think exceeded my expectations last year. So when they released Rock Flute, I was really kind of expecting more of the same, just kind of a continuation of what they had off of that album from last year. And I get the themes and stuff that they were trying to do on Rock Flute. But when I remember like the first time listening to this album, I thought to myself that this doesn't even sound like Jethro Tull. This sounds like a Jethro Tull cover band playing like elevator style versions of Jethro Tull songs. It just sounded off to me. It's just an album. Like I said, it's an album that I saw nothing. There's no value to it for me. There was nothing worth me even picking up a copy of it. And I guess when I say like elevator style, I mean like if you remember Riverdance from the 90s, it's almost like a progressive rock band doing Riverdance songs. That's kind of the feel I got for the album. And it just, I thought just a bad album. I remember reading a review about the album. It was probably within a few weeks after the album came out, where it said it was like, it was an album full of Dungeons and Dragons lyrics with medieval times music, and not like music from medieval times. I mean like medieval times, the restaurant. That's like the style on it. And I think it's a great way to describe the overall sound of this album. I just think there's just nothing redeeming on here. The lyrics are bad on here. I didn't like the mix of the album. I just think overall they just really missed on this album. I will say that none of the albums, at least the first 3 I went through, there's no numbering to them. I just think those are 3 disappointing albums to varying degrees. And then the last one, this is definitely, I think, in my opinion, the most disappointing album of the year. Obviously, something could come out over the month of December, but, as of right now, I think this is the most disappointing album because I had such high expectations going into this album because their last album was fantastic. And I think this is an album where the mix on this album just absolutely ruins it. That album is Starcatcher by Greta Van Fleet. And I know a lot of people out there really, have mixed feelings on Greta Van Fleet. Whether you have issues with their overall music sound or the sound of their music or the way the lead singer sings, the vocal style, I get it. There's a lot of complaints out there about the band. But their previous album, Battle of the Garden's Gate, in my opinion, it was one of the best rock albums of the last, 4 or 5 years. So going into this album, I had a lot of expectations that they would their music would grow, and they'd have, a better evolution to their sound and a better album. And while, musically, I think it is kind of a continuation of what they did at on Battle of Garden's Gate, but not to the same level. I think where, that album musically, like I said, I think is one of the better albums of the last several years. the music on this album, it feels kind of rushed. It doesn't have that same level of intricacy that the other album does. But really what my main complaint is on this album is the way this album is mixed. It is mixed horribly. And and I don't know if the way they mixed it was done intentional. Like I said, a lot of people have issues with the way the lead singer sings. And on this album, when you go through and listen to it, you almost can't even hear the lyrics on these songs. And like I said, I don't know if that was done intentional to kind of mask some of that and maybe try to get past a lot of the Led Zeppelin comparisons that the band gets. But, I think that really hurt this album overall. And just recently in the Vinyl Den Facebook group, there was a conversation about the new Blink-182 album and about how, there's a couple people that thought the way that album was mixed really damaged and hurt that album and kind of ruined that album overall. And that's how I feel about this album. The way this album was mixed. Hopefully, down the line we'll get a different mix of this album, and maybe I'll have a different feel, about the album overall. But just the way it's mixed, just absolutely destroys this album for me. And I think that if you were able to bring those vocals up a little bit differently, and kind of have a better overall even sound across these tracks, I think that I don't think it would be quite the same level as Battle of Garden's Gate, but I think that this album overall would sound a lot better than the way it does now. And also, it doesn't help that if you bought a physical form of this album, I did get the indie. I think this is no, I don't know which version of this, but this is on just standard clear vinyl. It sounds fine. But I know the indie exclusive, and there's a couple of different versions they sold through their website, was on Sparkle vinyl. And the glitter that they put in the album, you can actually hear on the record as it spins. And it just sounds horrible. And obviously I know most people don't listen to physical forms of music. They just kind of stream it. But even listening to it on streaming, the mix on it is just horrible. Well, that's all I got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop me a comment down below. I'd love to know what you guys think of these 4 albums. Like I said, Rush by Måneskin, So Much for Stardust by Fall Out Boy, Rock Flute by Jethro Tull, and then Starcatcher by Greta Van Fleet. 4 albums I had, some at least some kind of expectation that they were going to be good albums. Maybe not great albums, but definitely good albums. And I think all 4 of them kind of fell short of that. But let me know what you guys think. Make sure you drop me a comment down below also, and let me know what you guys think are your most disappointing albums of the year. I'd love to know what you guys think on all that. Of course, if you've enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all I got. Until next time, keep on spinning. Peace.